Ladies and gentlemen, it's great to be with you this afternoon talking about energy supply by and for cooperatives. I've been with Great River Energy since 2005. We've worked with Lake Region a lot on our power supply evolution since that time. And like Mike said, they're one of our favorite member systems as well. So just really delighted to be here and part of this forum today. And Dylan, you can go to the next slide. When you look at GRE's future, I just wanted to give you an overview of our portfolio right at the outset, and we'll go into a little more information on each of these components during the presentation. But we've evolved our portfolio quite dramatically over the past 15 years at Great River Energy. We have a strong capacity position. These are the resources that provide the reliability backbone of our system and keep the grid strong, especially during times of stress. So these resources are very important to us. We have 1,400 megawatts of natural gas-fired peaking capacity. 1,200 megawatts of that has dual fuel capabilities. So we have on-site oil. And we use that oil on cold winter days when natural gas gets really expensive or unavailable for power production. Then we switch over to oil. So it's a great safety net for us to make sure we have a reliable power grid, and we're doing our part to provide the capacity to that grid to cover our requirements of our member systems. The next part of our capacity portfolio going forward is going to be a purchase agreement to buy capacity from Coal Creek Station once we sell that plant to Rainbow Energy. That's 328 megawatts of our capacity position going forward. We'll talk a little more about that on a later slide, but it's a really important part of our reliability plan. And then finally, we have a 200 megawatt power purchase from Manitoba Hydro that provides capacity to our system. So those are the three main components of our capacity position. Of course, there are other smaller items in there, but that's how we're maintaining reliability after the transition away from Coal Creek in our portfolio, and I'll discuss that a little bit more later. We also have to focus on how do we hedge our energy costs. And so this is on an annual basis, we're buying energy from the MISO market. We're part of that market. How do we hedge the cost of buying all that energy to serve our members from a supply standpoint? Well, we used to hedge that energy with production of energy from Coal Creek Station, but we're selling that power plant and thereby saving the jobs at Coal Creek. And so how are we going to hedge our energy needs going forward? Our plan is to dramatically increase our wind portfolio. We'll have 1,600 megawatts in wind resources by 2025. 25% of that wind will be in North Dakota, and it'll be on the DC line. So we have a direct current transmission line that brings that power into the Twin Cities market where it's more valuable. And that will be the delivery point of that 400 megawatt wind agreement. So more on that later. And then the Rainbow Power Purchase Agreement is also an energy purchase. So it's a way for us to a little more gradually transition our way away from coal. We had 1,100 megawatts over the last 40 years of capacity and energy from Coal Creek Station. In 2023, that's going to become 328 megawatts until 2030. So it's a more gradual transition away from coal. It's a pretty dramatic reduction in our carbon risk in our coal position, but it's more gradual than a shutdown would have been. And then the third piece is the member-owner renewables, and I've got a separate set of slides on that, but it's an important part of our power supply portfolio going forward. And Dylan, we can go on to the next slide. So after our transition, this is the map showing where our power supply resources will be located and what types of resources we will have. So on this chart, the blue circles, those are natural gas-fired power plants. Purple circles are fuel oil. So you see most of the big circles are both purple and blue, and that's because they're dual fuel. They're able to be fired by fuel oil that's on site or by natural gas. That is just critically important in the wintertime. One of those plants, Cambridge Station, is just in blue right now. We are planning to convert that plant so that it can be run on oil in the wintertime. There are days when it's very cold that we can't get natural gas at Cambridge Station. It's our most northern large gas plant. It has close to 200 megawatts of capacity at that station. So we'd really like to have on-site oil there. So we're applying with the Pollution Control Agency and the Public Utilities Commission to put oil on site there. That takes advantage of all the investment we've already made in that plant and just gives us a better capacity and reliability portfolio in the wintertime. And then we have the green circles, and those are our wind farms. The big one that's being added in North Dakota is the Discovery Wind Project. It's in McLean County. It'll be connected to that DC line and brought into the Twin Cities market. And we show a power purchase from Rainbow in the Twin Cities market. We're buying that 328 megawatts of capacity and energy at the end of the DC transmission line in the Twin Cities, very close to major backbone transmission. So you can see our wind resources are spread around, and they take advantage of existing transmission interconnection locations. The Apex Wind Project uses the DC line. The wind farms in southern Minnesota were located there because we've already got transmission in place for those large peaking stations, 550 megawatts at Lakefield Junction and about the same amount at Pleasant Valley. So we're using that for wind interconnection. And it just so happens you can't really get spots on the transmission grid right now to interconnect wind farms. We've had one wind farm in our pipeline for the last 5 years that still doesn't have transmission interconnection approval from MISO. And as a result, we've not been able to bring that wind farm online yet. It's 100 megawatts. We've been waiting 5 years for all the transmission studies to be completed. And there are big dollar signs to get wind interconnected. So that's why these existing transmission interconnection locations at our existing peaking facilities and on the DC line have become so important. Moreover, the renewable member resources will be a good way to interconnect wind and solar, we think, in the future as well. Next slide, please. So our portfolio changes, if we could just highlight what's changing over the next couple of years with our portfolio, it would be on this slide. We're selling Coal Creek Station, retaining the jobs at the power plant, and we're also selling the DC system as part of the transaction. That preserves the jobs at the power plant, and it dramatically reduces the CO2 risk for GRE going forward. We had about 9 million tons of CO2 emissions a year from Coal Creek. Now that's down from the 13 million tons that we emitted back in 2005. So we have a lot less coal today and a lot less emissions today than we had in 2005. And we're going to go even much lower than that. Now, in terms of low carbon, a lot of folks ask us about the sale of Coal Creek and, won't the carbon emissions continue with Coal Creek going forward? Well, the state of North Dakota has set a carbon reduction goal, and it's for carbon neutrality. The governor has expressed a goal of carbon neutrality by 2030. The way to get there, if you're the state of North Dakota, is to pursue carbon capture and sequestration. And that's what Rainbow intends to pursue at Coal Creek Station. Now, there's several ingredients that have to come together to make carbon capture and sequestration possible, but we want to give them that opportunity. So we're selling the power plant to a party that's very interested in pursuing carbon capture and sequestration. In fact, they see it as being critical to the future of the plant's viability in the state and in the region. And we're also selling it into a state that supports carbon capture and sequestration and equally sees it as a vital aspect to their strategy for maintaining their coal industry in North Dakota. Moreover, if they can pull this off successfully, it's an example of carbon capture and sequestration that can be shown to the world and can have an impact that goes beyond the state of North Dakota and beyond that one plant. But there's a lot of ingredients that need to come together to make this happen. One is, in order to do a big carbon capture and sequestration project, first of all, you have to have a CO2 source. Well, we have that at Coal Creek Station, 9 million tons a year. Second is you have to have the right geology to permanently and safely store the CO2. And we have that right underneath the power plant at Coal Creek. It's a very unique alignment of geology along with CO2 production. So that's there. It's right underneath the power plant. Third is you need state and local support for doing carbon capture and sequestration. Well, we certainly have that in McLean County, North Dakota, where the plant is located, as well as in the state of North Dakota. They've got some of the leading legislation in place nationally for doing carbon capture and sequestration projects. And so all that has to come together for a project to be able to work. And then finally, you need incentives. And we've got that in the United States with federal incentives, tax credits for carbon capture and sequestration. So we're going to give them an opportunity at it. And we found that interest and that seriousness about carbon capture and sequestration. That was an important factor for us in the conversation with Rainbow on selling the power plant. And we certainly wish them well. And we've done some studies already to get them started on carbon capture and sequestration. They can hit the ground running. So we're selling Coal Creek in the DC system. The second big change that we're making is we're buying energy and capacity from Rainbow, and it's 328 megawatts. It's at a price that we like. It helps hedge our risk in the market. And we've seen prices go up a lot in the energy market this last year on a wholesale basis. Natural gas prices have gone up. That has driven power prices higher. So that hedge, that 328 megawatt purchase, becomes important to us versus just a shutdown scenario. The third is we've decided to put 400 megawatts of wind on that DC line. That's a strategic shift for us. We're very excited about that, and it brings that wind into a valuable market in the Twin Cities at the end of the DC line. And then finally, we've contracted for up to 600 megawatts of wind in southern Minnesota with NextEra Energy. That'll be located at our peaking plants in the south of the state and using those existing transmission interconnections. And Dylan, we can move on then to the next slide. So when we talk about our growing renewable energy portfolio, that portfolio was 144 megawatts of wind in 2005. Today, it's over 600 megawatts of wind. And by the time we make this transition away from Coal Creek Station, we'll have over 1,500 megawatts of wind. We're saying 1,600 is the goal. That takes advantage of the wind-rich region that we're a part of and uses wind to hedge our load cost in the MISO market going forward. So we're replacing Coal Creek Station with a combination of peaking plants, wind, and the 328 megawatt purchase from Rainbow that runs to 2030. These are some of the wind projects that are slated for addition to GRE's system. Next, please. So what does our energy picture look like after this transition? 2020 is the donut chart on the left. And this is actually quite a dramatic change from our energy chart that you would have seen in 2010 for GRE. 10 years earlier, you would have seen over 90% coal reliance for our energy production. But by 2020, that percentage was down to 55%. You know, Great River Energy and its member cooperatives have gone through one of the most dramatic transformations of our portfolio away from coal and into renewables that you can find anywhere in the country. We've taken advantage of production tax credits. We've taken advantage of the wind-rich region that we're part of, and we've taken advantage of existing transmission interconnections to make this all possible. But it's quite a dramatic transformation that we've already done going into 2020, and look at how much more transformation we have by 2027. That percentage goes down from 55% down to 24% coal in 2027. That's the Rainbow purchase of 24% in the donut chart on the right. So 2020, 55% coal, 25% renewable energy, well ahead of Minnesota's mandate of 25% renewables by 2025, and 18% interaction with the MISO market, buying economy energy from the market when it's cheaper than running our peaking stations. So what does that look like by 2027? Well, we'll have 57% of our energy in renewables. Almost all of that will be wind in 2027. This is GRE's production. So it's in addition to the solar that our members will produce by that time. 57% renewables, way ahead, way beyond the state's mandate of 25% by that year. 24% will be the Rainbow energy and capacity purchase. That's a very important part of our portfolio because wind doesn't always match up with our load requirements. So we have some risk of market purchases when demand is high on the system and maybe winds are light and variable or non-existent. We're buying energy in the market in that case. This 328 megawatt purchase helps hedge us in those situations, but we'll have to place some other hedges as well in the natural gas market. And then we've got three other sources of energy that are smaller. We've got market, where we're buying again when it's cheaper than running our peaking stations. We'll buy in the market. We have natural gas from our power plants, and then we have hydro at 6%. That's the Manitoba Hydro purchase. We're very excited about this portfolio strategy for 2027. We are trading away carbon risk in a big way. We'll have some more market risk in that year, but we're hedging that by having long-term wind agreements, by having this Rainbow energy purchase, and by planning some natural gas hedges for the portfolio in the future. Next slide. Now, this is the reliability chart. This is our capacity. So if we had to run all of our power plants to meet a peak demand condition, this is how much we can rely on them and where the energy comes from at peak demand times. On the left, you see the mix between natural gas and coal in 2020. 44% of our capacity was provided by Coal Creek Station. The vast majority of that was provided by Coal Creek in 2020. 43% from natural gas. Most of that's backed up by oil. But by 2027, we really do rely on that fleet of natural gas-fired peaking plants backed up by oil. This fleet of power plants is what makes the energy transition possible for us. And we're dramatically reducing carbon emissions, but we're doing it on the backs of these peaking plants that are so important. And so when you hear talk of legislation of going 100% carbon-free by any certain date, we push back strongly against that type of extreme thinking. The cheapest carbon reductions are the first reductions. And when you get into the realm of our peaking plants, if you start banning peaking plants from having any emissions of carbon dioxide, you may be costing yourself more money than it would cost you to simply capture that CO2 in some other method, such as through ambient air capture, which is being worked on all across the world. So that peaking fleet is just critical, and it's what makes this transformation possible for Great River Energy. The Rainbow purchase is 14% of our capacity. That runs out in 2030, so our next capacity addition will be 2030 or beyond. And we're looking at northern Minnesota for some options there, maybe some long duration storage, and we'll see where that plan goes. Hydro is 9%, and then you can see the fuel oil. We have a few peaking plants that are fuel oil only, and 5% of capacity from renewable. Now let's talk about that for a minute. 1,600 megawatts of wind, and folks say, well, aren't you going to be threatening reliability? Well, not from a capacity standpoint, because we don't rely on wind for reliability. We rely on dispatchable capacity for reliability. So only 5% of our capacity comes from wind. This is based on a probability analysis that when you're at a peak demand condition in the market, how much can you count on the wind that's on our portfolio? And it tends to be about 10% of the nameplate capacity. So for a 100 megawatt wind farm, we might get a capacity credit of 10 megawatts. That's how much we can rely on it during a peak demand condition. Next, please. So if you had to boil down our portfolio strategy, this is in addition to our member renewables. this is where GRE is headed with our portfolio strategy. The MISO market is a multi-state energy transaction market. It's organized market, it has transparent prices, and that becomes our virtual battery. All of our generation, all of our wind, all the power production from our peaking plants, it's all sold into that MISO market. Separately, we buy all of our requirements from the MISO market to serve our member cooperatives. As such, that market becomes our virtual battery. If there's a mismatch between wind production and when we demand energy, we're selling that excess into the market sometimes. We're buying that deficit from the market at other times. So it's a nice economic virtual battery for us. We will add other long duration batteries in the long run, but in the meantime, the market is our battery. Our wind resources, these are our core energy production units. They provide that long-term hedge against the MISO market price for energy. I mentioned already the importance of our natural gas-fired peaking generation fleet backed up by oil. And then we have our power purchase agreements, which for now, the main one is this Rainbow purchase agreement, but there'll be other agreements that we'll be entering into, including natural gas hedges to manage our market exposure. Next, please. So what does this all mean for carbon reductions for GRE? Well, it's quite a dramatic reduction in our carbon emissions. So the line at the top, the 0% line, that is 2005 levels. And you may know that Minnesota has a carbon reduction goal economy-wide of 80% carbon reduction by 2050. Well, this chart shows you we'll be at 90% in 2031. So 19 years ahead of the state's goal, we're gonna be there. We've already met the interim goals in that legislation, one of which is 2030. So we're way ahead of that one. So by the time this power purchase agreement goes in place for 328 megawatts, we'll be at over a 70% reduction in our CO2 emissions. When that contract runs out in 2030, then we'll be at 90%. It's a dramatic reduction, major and massive transformation in our portfolio. And we think it was very smart to hedge ourselves with some energy from that power plant and actually give our employees a chance at carbon capture and sequestration, because Rainbow's hiring our people, and they've studied the opportunities on carbon capture over the past several years at that power station. Next. Now, while all of this is happening, we're focused on resiliency. And a lot of folks get concerned about selling a coal plant because they're worried about our ability to keep the lights on. So we are focused on our ability to keep the lights on. For one thing, the plant's going to stay in operation, and they're going to pursue carbon capture. But for another thing, we're focused on our own power plants that will remain. We're focused on the staff, the process, the fuel situation at each plant, and the technology that we put in place at the plants to make them hardened for these very cold conditions. And that's the time period that we're most concerned about, is those very cold winter days. And that's usually when, if you're going to have a breakdown in equipment, that's sometimes when equipment can be susceptible to the elements. And we saw that last winter with the rolling blackouts in the state of Texas. We're very familiar with very cold weather here. We're seeing some of it today. We're seeing some extreme conditions today. And our people are focused on making sure our power plants in Minnesota are resilient and can handle these extreme conditions and can switch over to a backup fuel if needed. Next. And then we're excited about long duration storage. In fact, we see this as being key to addressing reliability as the amount of renewable generation increases. And we're going to be pursuing a demonstration project, a pilot project, 1 megawatt in Cambridge, next to our Cambridge power plant. Very exciting. It'll be 150 hours of capability. Imagine that. 1 megawatt, you could sustain output for 150 hours. The cost per megawatt hour, you have to drive it down in a big way. And we're working on that with a company called Form Energy. We'll have their first 1 megawatt scale pilot project. It's slated for 2023. So we're excited about that. It's using iron that's mined right here in Minnesota to store energy. Next, please. And you can advance 2 slides, Dylan. We're working with our members on a renewable self-supply option. This becomes more important to us as we transition the portfolio and as we find difficulty locating large wind farms on the power grid going forward. We want to see more development of local renewable sources. We want to make sure that it's not going to cause cost shifts or not going to cause cost increases for members. And so that's the balance that we're driving, but we want to promote growth in the renewable self-supply of our members. So today, members can self-supply up to 5% of their requirements using an option in our contract. We were the first G&T in the country to have this option. Many others followed suit after GRE and our members developed this option. And the intent when we put this option in place over 10 years ago, it was close to 15 years ago, was to promote renewable generation and flexibility in self-supply within the members' assigned service area. Now, some members are starting to bump up against the 5% limit on this option, so a conversation has begun. Next slide. Here you can see the growth in a number of projects that are online. We've got 24 projects online as of 2021, and most of our all requirements members, 14 of the 20, are actively participating in this option. So some are already at the 5% limit. The average member is today at about 1%, so there's a lot of room left to grow within the 5%, but some members are bumping up against the limit because they've been pioneers in this option. They've been leaders in this option. Certainly Lake Region has been a leader in this option and having the conversation about looking at an expansion of it as well. So looking ahead, next slide. We are exploring some modifications to this option. Today it has a limit of 5%. We were considering expanding that to 7 to 10%. A committee of members has been formed to explore this and to develop the rules for it. We're going to address transmission access and backfeeding because we want to make this more flexible. Up until today, the option has served local areas. It's served local needs. We want to see if it can be made more flexible that you could, in addition to serving some local needs, that maybe you'd have some supply that could flow onto the transmission grid as well. So we're carefully examining that. And then we want to review treatment of storage because we'd like to encourage development of cost-effective storage if it can be done. So this committee has begun its work. They'll be working over the next 6 months or so, coming up with contract changes for GRE's members to consider. This has got a lot of people excited about the prospects and the future of this 5% option. And in the meantime, most of our members have a lot of room left on the 5% option itself. Xcel Energy has a solar mandate, 1.5%. Our members have a 5% solar option in their contract. Could be multiples of what Xcel does, and we want to expand that option. So it's a pretty exciting time. I appreciate the time today. It's great to talk with all of you. I look forward to the questions later. And I'll turn it over to my friend and the CEO of Lake Region, Tim Thompson, for the next part of the presentation. Thank you very much.